Before I share my story, let me ask you, what would you do if, by pretending not to understand, you learned the truth about how your son's new family really saw you? I thought I was being polite, giving my son's in-laws a chance to speak freely. But the night I sat quietly at their dinner table, pretending not to understand English, I heard things that changed not just my heart, but the future of my family. This isn't just a story about language or culture. It's about the moment you realize that respect is not a given, and that sometimes the greatest power you have is the choice to walk away or to rewrite your own ending. So settle in, because what I heard that night changed not just my will, but the way I see myself forever. The night I pretended not to understand English at my son's in-laws' dinner, I learned more about my family than I ever wanted to know. It started with an invitation. Not a casual one, but the kind that comes on thick, cream-colored paper, with gold lettering and a return address from the other side of town. My son, David, had married into a family that prided itself on tradition, on appearances, on doing things the right way. His wife, Julia, was lovely, smart, kind, always quick with a smile. But her parents, the Changs, were another story. They were polite, of course, always polite. But there was a distance, a formality, a sense that I was being measured and found wanting. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was just nerves, just culture, just the awkwardness of blending two families from different worlds. When Julia's mother called to invite me to dinner, I hesitated. I'd met them a handful of times, at the wedding, at holidays, at the occasional family gathering. Each time, I'd felt like an outsider, a guest in a world that wasn't mine. But I wanted to be supportive, to show David that I was willing to try. So I said yes. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. A simple black dress, pearls, the scarf David had given me for my birthday. I practiced my smile in the mirror, rehearsed polite conversation, reminded myself to be gracious, to be kind, to be the mother-in-law Julia deserved. When I arrived at the Chang's house, Julia greeted me at the door, her eyes bright, her smile genuine. "I'm so glad you're here, Mom," she whispered, hugging me tight. "It means a lot to David." I squeezed her hand, my nerves settling a little. "Thank you for inviting me." Inside, the house was immaculate, polished wood floors, gleaming silver, the scent of jasmine and ginger in the air. Julia's parents greeted me with polite smiles, ushering me into the dining room, seating me at the end of a long, gleaming table. David sat beside me, his hand warm on my arm. "Just relax, Mom, it's just dinner." I nodded, forcing a smile. But I could feel the tension in the room, the way Julia's parents watched me, the way their voices softened when they spoke to each other in Mandarin. Dinner was a blur of courses: steamed fish, braised pork, delicate dumplings, bowls of rice. I tried to keep up, to follow the conversation, to laugh at the right moments. But the conversation kept slipping into Mandarin, leaving me on the outside, smiling politely, nodding when I thought it was appropriate. At one point, Julia's mother turned to me, her smile tight. "You don't speak Mandarin, do you, Mrs. Evans?" I shook my head, my voice soft. "No, I'm afraid not, just English." She nodded, her eyes flickering to her husband. "That's all right, we'll try to speak English for you." But as the night wore on, the conversation drifted back to Mandarin, the laughter growing louder, the jokes flying over my head. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, pretending not to notice. At dessert, Julia's father raised his glass, his voice booming. "To family," he said, his eyes lingering on me. "To new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, the room echoing with laughter and clinking crystal. I smiled, but inside I felt more alone than ever. After dinner, Julia and David offered to help clear the table. Julia's mother waved them off, insisting they join the others in the living room for tea. I stood to help, but Mrs. Chang shook her head, her smile polite but firm. "Please, Mrs. Evans, you are our guest. Sit, relax." I nodded, returning to my seat, but I could feel the tension in my shoulders. I watched as Julia's parents and their friends moved around the kitchen, speaking in quick, quiet Mandarin. Every so often, someone would glance my way, their eyes lingering just a little too long. I tried to focus on the details, the delicate china, the way the light caught the crystal, the scent of orange peel and cinnamon in the air. I thought about David as a little boy, about the birthday parties and school plays, about the way he used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories. I thought about the years I'd spent raising him, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd poured into every corner of our home. I wondered if Julia's parents had ever felt the same way about her. When Julia and David returned, the conversation shifted to English. Julia's father asked about David's job, about their new apartment, about their plans for the future. David answered politely, his voice steady, but I could see the strain in his eyes. Julia's mother asked about my work, my hobbies, my plans for retirement. I answered as best I could, trying to sound interesting, trying to prove that I belonged. But every time the conversation drifted back to Mandarin, I felt the distance grow. I sat quietly, sipping my tea, pretending not to notice the way their voices softened, the way their laughter grew sharper, the way their eyes flickered to me and then away. At one point, Julia's aunt leaned over, her voice low. "Do you understand what we're saying, Mrs. Evans?" I shook my head, smiling politely. "No, I'm afraid not, just English." She nodded, her eyes narrowing. "That's all right. Sometimes it's better not to understand." I laughed, but the sound was hollow. After dessert, Julia's father stood, raising his glass again. "To family," he said, his eyes lingering on me. "To new beginnings." Everyone raised their glasses, the room echoing with laughter and clinking crystal. I smiled, but inside I felt more alone than ever. That night, as I drove home, I replayed the evening in my mind. I thought about the way Julia's parents had looked at me, the way their voices had softened when they spoke in Mandarin, the way their laughter had grown louder when they thought I wasn't listening. I wondered what they'd said about me. I wondered if they'd judged me, pitied me, resented me. I wondered if I'd ever truly belong in their world. I realized then that I was tired of pretending, tired of shrinking myself to fit someone else's story. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and started making a list, not of things to do, but of things I wanted, things I deserved. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. I replayed every moment of the dinner, every glance, every word I could remember. I wondered if I was being paranoid, if I was reading too much into things, if maybe I was just tired and lonely and missing the days when family felt simple. I called Ruth, my sister, and told her about the dinner. "Did they really call you out for not speaking Mandarin?" she asked, her voice sharp. I sighed. Not exactly, but it was clear I was an outsider. They kept switching back and forth, laughing at things I couldn't understand. I felt like a piece of furniture. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to put up with that, Anna. You deserve respect." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know, but I don't want to make trouble for David. He's so happy with Julia. I just want to be part of their lives." I tried to shake it off, to focus on my own life. I went to my painting class, took long walks in the park, spent evenings with Leela and Ruth. But the ache lingered, a constant reminder that I didn't quite belong. A few days later, Julia called. Her voice was bright, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Mom, would you like to come to dinner again next week? My parents want to get to know you better." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "Of course, sweetheart, I'd love to." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. I wondered if I was making a mistake, if I was setting myself up for more pain. But I wanted to try. I wanted to believe that things could get better. That week, I started paying closer attention. I listened to the way Julia talked about her parents, about their expectations, about the pressure she felt to be perfect. I noticed the way David seemed quieter, more withdrawn, the way he avoided talking about the future. One afternoon, I stopped by their apartment to drop off a casserole. Julia was out, but David was home, sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked up, his eyes red. "I'm just tired, Mom. Work is stressful. Julia's parents are a lot." I sat beside him, rubbing his back. "You don't have to do this alone, David. I'm here for you." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thanks, Mom. I just want everyone to get along." That night, I made a decision. At the next dinner, I would pretend not to understand English. I wanted to know what Julia's parents really thought of me, what they said when they thought I wasn't listening. I wanted the truth, even if it hurt. I practiced my expression in the mirror, blank, polite, just a hint of confusion. I rehearsed my lines, my smiles, my nods. I told myself I was being silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress and a scarf that reminded me of my mother. I arrived at the Chang's house, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. Julia greeted me at the door, her smile bright. "I'm so glad you're here, Mom." I smiled, my voice soft. "Thank you for inviting me." Inside, the house was as immaculate as ever. Julia's parents greeted me with polite smiles, ushering me into the dining room, seating me at the end of the table. As the meal began, I let my expression go blank, my answers short, my smile polite. When the conversation drifted into Mandarin, I sat quietly, sipping my tea, pretending not to notice. But I listened. I listened to every word, every laugh, every sigh. And what I heard changed everything. But before the conversation turned, I noticed the little things. The way Julia's mother looked at me, her eyes lingering on my hands, my clothes, the way I held my fork. The way Julia's father spoke to David, his tone clipped, his words full of subtle warnings. The way Julia herself seemed to shrink, her laughter forced, her eyes darting between her parents and me. I watched as the family slipped into Mandarin, their voices growing softer, their laughter sharper. I caught a few words, my name, David's name, the word for old, the word for burden. I didn't need a translation to know what they meant. I felt the sting of humiliation, the ache of being talked about as if I wasn't there. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to demand respect. But I stayed quiet, my face calm, my heart pounding. I realized then that sometimes, silence is the most powerful weapon you have. The conversation at the table grew more animated as the wine flowed. Julia's parents and their friends slipped in and out of English, but mostly they spoke Mandarin, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm I'd come to recognize as both intimate and exclusive. I kept my face blank, my eyes on my plate, my ears open. At first, it was small things, comments about the food, about the weather, about the old-fashioned way I dressed. But as the evening wore on, the words grew sharper, the laughter more pointed. "She doesn't understand a word we're saying," Julia's mother said, her voice low but clear. "It's a shame David married someone from such a simple background. She'll never fit in here." Julia's father snorted. "She's just here for the free meal. I hope David knows he'll be supporting her for the rest of his life." One of the aunts chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's so quiet. I wonder if she even knows how to have a real conversation." They laughed, the sound sharp and cold. I sat there, my heart pounding, my hands clenched in my lap. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to tell them I understood every word. But I stayed silent, letting their words wash over me, letting the truth sink in. Julia caught my eye, her face pale. She knew I was hurt, but she didn't say anything. David looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, but he didn't defend me. I realized then that I was alone at that table, surrounded by people who saw me as less than, as an outsider, as a burden. The meal dragged on, each course feeling heavier than the last. I picked at my food, the flavors turning to ash in my mouth. I could feel the heat of humiliation rising in my cheeks, the sting of tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. I tried to focus on the clink of silverware, the flicker of candlelight, the soft music playing in the background, anything to distract myself from the ache in my chest. After dinner, Julia's mother pulled David aside, speaking in rapid Mandarin. I caught a few words: inheritance, money, future. I watched as David's face tightened, his jaw clenching, his eyes darting to me and then away. I realized then that this wasn't just about respect. It was about power, about control, about who would have a say in David's life and in mine. As the guests began to leave, Julia's father shook my hand, his grip firm, his smile thin. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Evans. Family is so important, isn't it?" I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it is." When I got home that night, I sat in the dark, the words echoing in my mind. I thought about the years I'd spent building a life for David, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd given. I thought about the family I'd tried so hard to be part of, the doors that had been closed to me, the walls that had been built around me. I realized then that I was done waiting for respect. I was done shrinking myself to fit someone else's world. It was time to change my will. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a real breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and sat at the table with the newspaper, just like I used to before life got so complicated. I decided I would not let Julia's parents' words define me. I would not let their laughter or their judgment dictate my worth. I called Ruth and told her everything I'd overheard. She was silent for a long moment, then said, "Anna, you have every right to protect yourself. You have every right to decide who deserves your trust and your legacy." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm going to see my lawyer. I want to update my will." Ruth offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this on my own. I wanted to walk into that office with my head held high, knowing I was making a choice for myself, not for anyone else. At the lawyer's office, I explained what had happened. I told her about the dinner, about the things I'd heard, about the way I'd been treated. She listened, her eyes kind, her pen poised over her notepad. "You're not the first client to come in with a story like this, Anna. Family can be complicated, but your will is your voice. You get to decide who matters." We spent the next hour going over the details. My house, my savings, the little things I'd saved for Emily and David, the charities I wanted to support. I made it clear that I wanted my wishes respected, that I wanted to leave a legacy of love, not of resentment or regret. When I left the office, I felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That evening, I called David. I told him I needed to talk, just the two of us. He came over, his face drawn, his eyes tired. We sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy. "David," I began, my voice steady, "I need you to know what happened at dinner. I need you to know what your in-laws said about me." He listened, his face growing pale, his hands clenched in his lap. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I had no idea. I should have defended you. I should have said something." I reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. "It's not too late, David, but you need to decide where your loyalty lies. You need to decide what kind of family you want to build." He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I love you, Mom. I don't want to lose you." I hugged him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. "Then don't." The days that followed were tense. David tried to bridge the gap between me and Julia's family, but the damage was done. Julia called, her voice tight, asking why I'd left the dinner so early, why I seemed distant. I told her the truth, that I'd felt unwelcome, that I'd heard things I couldn't forget. She was silent for a long moment. "My parents are old-fashioned, Mom. They don't mean anything by it." I shook my head, my voice calm but firm. "Respect isn't old-fashioned, Julia. It's the foundation of family." Word spread quickly through the family. Ruth and Leela were outraged on my behalf, calling to check in, offering support, reminding me that I was loved. Some relatives called to gossip, others to offer sympathy, a few to ask if I was really changing my will. I kept my answers simple. "I'm making sure my wishes are respected. That's all anyone needs to know." A week later, Julia's parents invited me to another dinner. I hesitated, but decided to go. I wanted to see if anything had changed, if there was any hope for reconciliation. The evening started politely enough, small talk, compliments on the food, questions about my health. But as the night wore on, the conversation drifted back to Mandarin, the laughter growing sharper, the glances more pointed. This time, I didn't pretend not to understand. I looked Julia's mother in the eye and said, in perfect English, "I know what you've been saying about me. I know you think I'm a burden, that I don't belong. But I want you to know that I hear you. and I will not be erased from my own family. The room went silent. Julia's father cleared his throat, his face red. Julia stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. David reached for my hand under the table, his grip strong. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you sooner." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. "It's never too late, sweetheart." After that night, things changed. Julia's parents kept their distance, their calls less frequent, their invitations fewer. David and Julia started spending more time with me, inviting me to their home, including me in their plans. Emily came home from college, her presence a balm to my heart. We started new traditions: Sunday dinners, movie nights, long walks in the park. We laughed, we cried, we healed. I realized then that family isn't about blood or tradition or appearances. It's about love, about respect, about the people who show up when you need them most. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready for whatever came next. As the months passed, the tension with Julia's parents faded into the background. They still sent holiday cards and the occasional polite invitation, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a careful distance. I didn't mind. I had found my own peace, my own circle, my own sense of belonging. David and Julia's marriage grew stronger. They learned to set boundaries with her family, to put each other, and our little family, first. Julia apologized for not standing up for me sooner, for letting her parents' opinions cloud her judgment. We talked openly about what had happened, about the pain and the lessons, about the kind of family we wanted to be. Emily flourished at college, calling home every Sunday, filling the house with laughter and stories when she visited. She brought friends with her, young people from all over the world, and our home became a place of welcome, of warmth, of new beginnings. Ruth and Leela remained my anchors. We started a tradition of Friday night dinners, sometimes just the three of us, sometimes with David and Julia, sometimes with neighbors who had become like family. We shared recipes, swapped stories, and celebrated every small victory. I found new purpose in volunteering at the community center, helping children with their homework, teaching art classes, organizing food drives. I realized that giving back wasn't just about helping others. It was about healing myself, about finding joy in the act of service, about building a life that mattered. I started writing again, journals, letters, stories for myself and for Emily. I wrote about forgiveness, about starting over, about the way love can survive even the deepest wounds. I wrote about the lessons I'd learned, about the hope I still carried in my heart. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, David joined me, his eyes soft. "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for never giving up on me, for teaching me what it means to be strong." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Thank you, David, for coming back, for remembering who you are." We sat in silence, the world quiet around us, the future wide open. I was still here, I was still standing, and I was ready for whatever came next. As the new year began, I looked around at the life I'd rebuilt. The house filled with light, the laughter of friends and family, the quiet joy of ordinary days, and felt a deep, abiding sense of hope. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before that dinner at Julia's parents' house. I was stronger, wiser, more compassionate with myself and with the people I loved. I knew that life would never be perfect, that there would always be pain and loss and disappointment. But I also knew that I could survive, that I could rebuild, that I could find joy in the small, everyday moments. Sometimes, the things we hear when we think no one is listening are the things that change us the most. I never imagined that pretending not to understand English at my son's in-laws' dinner would reveal the truth about how they saw me, or that it would give me the courage to change my will and my life for good. But life has a way of teaching us that respect is not a given, and that sometimes the greatest power we have is the choice to walk away or to rewrite our own ending. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who should have welcomed you, or if you've ever had to find your own voice in a room full of people who didn't see your worth, I hope you know you're not alone. Healing isn't quick, and it isn't easy. But with time, honesty, and a little bit of grace, it is possible. Sometimes, the real strength is in letting go, not just of the people who hurt you, but of the guilt and shame you never deserved to carry. Would you have spoken up or kept pretending for the sake of peace? Have you ever had to choose between holding on and letting go? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share it with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Thank you for listening and for being part of this family. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, even after the deepest heartbreak, you can still choose to begin again.